Okay, time to make a new video. But what shall it be about?
Hey! What just happened?
I love that cream gravy.
God damn it! Whoa!
Lil
Ah, screw this, I can't think of anything at the moment. I know, I'll just get some fresh air instead.
What was that? Hit me! I dare you!
Oh, hey Lenin.
Привет, товарищ.
Say, what you doing here at the moment?
Надежда это поможет вам в вашем благородном стремлении.
I'm doing another history video for some friends of mine, but I'm struggling to figure out what to make for this video. Can you give me any advice, old buddy?
Может быть, я могу помочь вам. Власть народа.
Ah, I see your idea now. A bit too much for the posters, isn't it? Thanks a bunch, Lenin.
Надежда это поможет вам в вашем благородном стремлении.
What a swell guy. Hello again everyone, and welcome to another historical film thingy, and this video is about the Russian Revolution. Without doubt one of my favourite subjects of all time, alongside other subjects such as military history and the Seleucid Empire.
Yes!
Really. This is without doubt one of the most important and pivotal events in political history, alongside the French Revolution, the founding of the Roman Empire, the rise of fascism, and the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The list goes on. This subject has a mixed opinion among historians and the general public. To some, such as young people and, well, the presenter here, it is the birth of a new idea. A newer, fairer society where everyone is equal and the old unfair ways are cast aside for a brighter, more fairer tomorrow. To others, well, the reactions kind of vary.
He's coming right at us!
To them, it birthed another dictatorship, hardship for the individual, a repressive society with harsher punishments. It led to a half-century ideological clash and staring contest that almost led to nuclear war. But enough about that. This video will discuss the Russian Revolution, both the February and the October one. In this video, we will discuss the Russia before 1917, the revolution itself, and the repercussions afterwards. So, Enough talking? Let's get on. Forward, comrades! To the revolution! The Russian Empire, founded by Peter the Great in 1721 via the decline of her neighbours of Sweden, Poland, Lithuania, Persia and the Ottoman Empire, became one of the major powers in Europe until the 20th century. During her life, she would defeat Napoleon in 1812 to 1814, expanded into Alaska, only for it to be bought by the US in 1861, damn, and fight some of Europe's biggest powers in the name of God, Empire and King. However, via the late 19th century, the world and its thinking was changing, and Russia's power was in decline. In 1854 to 1856, Russia would lose an embarrassing war against a coalition of Britain, France, the Kingdom of Sardinia, and the Ottoman Empire in the Crimean War. Noticing Russia's weakness during the war, the Tsar, Nicholas I, and his successor Tsar would reform the empire by emancipating the serfs in 1861, reorganizing the jurisdiction system, abolishing capital punishment, promoted self-governance via the Semstvos system, and promoted university education. For all the economic shifts and technological advancements of the previous 50 years, the Europe that went to war in 1914 was still a network of societies divided along starkly traditional lines. The persistence of the old order was most obvious in the autocratic Russian Empire. Answerable only to God, the Tsar appointed the commanders of the army and the fleet, the ministers and provisional governments. Despite Russia's rapid industrialization, which caused the urban population to double in 40 years before 1914, well over 80% of the people lived in rural areas. When the revolution came in 1917, it was hardly a surprise that so many chose to support the new order rather than the old. Although serfdom had been abolished in 1867, there had been little change in the lives of the vast majority of the Russian peasantry. A seemingly unbridgeable gulf still separated them from their former owners. The extravagant lifestyle of the aristocrat shocked foreign visitors to Imperial Russia. The war made little difference. Sir Samuel Horace, British intelligence officer in Petrograd, commented that the wealth and the lavish use they made of it dazzled me after the austere conditions of wartime life in England. However, by 1900, Tsar Nicholas II has taken the throne of the empire. And unlike the other Tsars, Nicholas II was known for his reactionary and repressive measures. So much so that his political rivals even named him Nicholas the Bloody, led to anti-Semitic pogroms due to his rule. He was ineffective at rule and cared more for his family than state affairs. But due to poor transportation system in the empire, his rule was ineffective and inefficient. The empire's economy was mostly agricultural, but with the industrialization in the late 19th century, up to 40% of the population would be employed in factories by 1914, leading to the creation of the factory proletariat alongside the vast illiterate peasantry. Along with illiteracy, high taxes, poor harvests, little political freedom, the population was set to explode with anger. Nationalism too was tearing the empire apart from within, especially within Poland and Ukraine. Internationally, the Russian Empire entered an alliance with France and involved herself in the Balkan affairs, which was a region ready to explode and lay in between three dying empires with three dying ambitions. Alongside seeing herself as a protector of Slavs everywhere, she sought possessions in the Far East, especially in the collapsing Qing dynasty in China. In 1904 and 1905, Russia fought a brief war with Japan over possessions in Korea, notably for a warmer water port in the Pacific in Port Arthur, which Russia actually took off Japan's hands after the previous war in 1895. What followed was an embarrassing defeat to Japan, the first defeat by a European power to an Asian one in history. With this embarrassing defeat and the international dissatisfaction of the empire, the 1905 revolution would kick off. On the 22nd of January 1905, the peasants, industrial workers, liberals, socialists, and many unsatisfied people within the empire rose up in revolt, starting the 1905 revolution. Led by Viktor Chernov and the future communist Leon Trotsky, they delivered a petition known as the October Manifesto, following the Bloody Sunday event, when 1,000 protesters were gunned down by the Tsar's guards at the Winter Palace. Revolts and strikes would erupt throughout the empire and grinded it to a halt. Alongside the reformers, separatists in Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Finland and other states rose in revolt for greater home rule or all-out independence. Under the October Manifesto, it proposed on the 17th of October 1905 greater individual freedoms of consciousness, free speech and assembly, giving civilians participation in the newly formed Duma, and ensure no law cannot be passed without the consent of the Imperial Duma. The Tsar, Nicholas II, was forced to approve. The Constitution of 1906 was drafted, and the Imperial Duma was founded. The empire became a de jure parliamentary monarchy, but the Tsar began to break promises with the Duma, changing voting rules from universal suffrage to landed rights ruling. Others included Finland becoming a semi-autonomous duchy, Russia becoming one and indivisible, and Russian being promoted as the major language throughout the empire, with other more local dialects being used and dependent via local laws. And the Tsar also had the power to veto. This he would use to influence the Duma to his liking, and turned it from a people's assembly to a Tsar-controlled institution, electing governors who promoted his rule and his way. Although achieving some of the revolt's goals, the Tsar's lack of trust in the system would not appease the rebels. But another event would halt the next revolution for a while. Everyone knows what happened when World War I finally started, and how it started as well. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand, along with his wife Sofia, was shot by a Serbian terrorist known as Gavrilo Princip in Sarajevo, Bosnia on June 28, 1914. In the following days of July, known as the July Crisis, various powers would declare war out of need to fulfill their desires and their obligation to the treaties that various parties have signed during the years before the war. When Austro-Hungary declared war on Serbia out of revenge of the assassinations on July 28th, Russia ordered mobilization of its troops on July 31st. This simple action would cause the domino effect that would finally lead to the Great War, as various other powers would counteract and try to counter each other's movements. For the most part, Russia at the start of the war would have the largest army, hence why she was known as the Russian Steamroller. 115 infantry divisions, 38 cavalry divisions, 7,900 guns, 12 million men in the army, with an extra 5 million reserve. Indeed, the Steamroller was a very, very appropriate name. But to really simplify it, that is a lot of freaking soldiers. But modern war can be pretty cruel to these large numbers of soldiers, and this Steamroller was indeed feared by her enemies. The sheer numbers were almost endless. Even Germany, with her massive conscription and her well-trained army, at first feared her, and were even fearful of her invading Eastern Prussia. And quite unfairly, to what most historians say, despite Russia's problems of industrialization and her army was beginning to modernize, and this was indeed a rising power. Although the problems began to show her weakness of the empire. This army was fearsome, dutiful, patriotic, willing to fight for their cause, but problems within would plague this army of the Tsar. For example, 1 in 5 soldiers had no rifles, but up to 12 cartridges per soldier. The soldiers were largely peasants who were mostly illiterate. Their officers were no better, some with no official military training. Corruption was rampant, and the Tsar and the royal court were mostly in overall command of the army, who too had little military training. Finally, the transportation system, which in civilian life was bad, but in times of war, like Austro-Hungary, was not ready for a protracted war. Anyways, the war. If the war could be portrayed in one way for Russia, it is this. Against the armies of Austria-Hungary, Russia would defeat the Habsburgs nearly 90% of the time, whilst against a more highly trained German army, Russia would be defeated nearly 75% of the time, and in some cases, catastrophic. Now I'm going to go through a list of some of the major battles that Russia would fight. These will include mostly the European battles between Austro-Hungary and Germany, although the Russians would fight the Ottoman Empire in Turkey and the Caucasus front. But it is these wars between Germany that would definitely influence the outcome of the coming revolutions. So for the sake of time, I'm going to go over some of the main battles in Europe in less detail. Okay, here we go. The battles from 1914 to 1916. 1914. In Galicia, the Russians captured the major railway junction in Lemberg from the Austro-Hungarians on September 11th. In response, the Austrians retreat to their main lines in the Carpathian Mountains, prepare for defensive works, and prepare for defensive war. The Germans would arrive to reinforce the Austrians from Silesia on September 18th. Meanwhile, in eastern Prussia, 2 Russian armies of the 1st and 2nd Army, under the command of General Rennenkampf and General Samsonov, were defeated by Hindenburg's 8th Army in Tannenberg, mostly due to the superb tactics of Hindenburg, as well as the perfect railway lines compared to the Russians. Out of this battle, 125,000 Russians were captured, and also Samsonov would commit suicide out of defeat. Finally, on November and December 1914, the Germans would capture Lodz near Poland, and the Austrians would drive back a Russian attack near Kharkov. These attacks would have threatened Warsaw. 1915. From May 2nd until September 30th, The combined army of the Austro-Germans would attack from East Prussia and the Galician battle lines. These attacks would capture Warsaw, Vilnius, Brest-Litovsk, and would push the Russians completely out of Poland into the Pripyat marshes. Up to 1 million Russians would be killed during the advance across Poland, compared to 50,000 Germans and 300,000 Austrians. However, their retreat was well coordinated and was very aggressive. However, a mass exodus of refugees would clog the Russian retreat, and many rifles would be lost, which for the Russians were in desperately short supply. 1960, the year the Russians would finally start fighting back, but also the same year the problems would begin to become more obvious than ever. In Russia, 70,000 rifles were produced a month, but this cannot compensate for the need for 2,000 rifles a month to be required to supply the Russian army. Logistically, the need to import 2,300,000 rifles would cause a logistical nightmare for Russia. In Russia herself, the Tsarina would take governmental control, but she would be under Rasputin, a known mystic in Russia, under Rasputin's influence. Since he healed Crown Prince Alexius's haemophilia, this would result in a very disastrous government. Until 1917, Russia would have 4 prime ministers, 3 ministers of transport, 4 ministers of agriculture. Pretty much too many ministers for one job. Alongside this shamble of a government, there was a scarcity of food and fuel, rampant inflation, the collapse of the transportation system, and rising crime rate. This made revolution incredibly likely among the Russian population. Even the army, after so many defeats, would becoming more and more defeated. There were reports of them fraternizing with the enemy, and manpower was beginning to reach its end and couldn't even fill the army's casualty. And also because of the poor supplies and logistics, some army units were becoming more poorly fed and dread. On March 16th, the Russians would launch Lake Naroch offensive near East Vilnius. This only had limited gain. However, by April 14th, the German counterattacks would eliminate these gains. 110,000 Russians were killed in the operation, and out of this futile attempt, morale begins to plummet. Finally, some good news for once for the Russians. Finally, on June 4th, Great General Alexei Brusilov would launch the Brusilov offensive on a 300-mile front into Galicia and parts of Poland. Quick fact, this operation would be the only known operation in World War I named after a general. Using infantry shock tactics and artillery use in coordination with the infantry, they take the Austro-Hungarian lines by surprise. 193,000 Habsburg troops would be taken by June 4th. However, the offensive was halted by German reinforcements near Korwel, or Korwel, I don't know how to say it. Well, I'm just going to say that. Although the attacks really achieved nothing overall, it showed Russian potential if the attacks were well led and well commanded. However, these gains would be taken back later by 1970, and 1 million Russians would be killed or taken prisoner out of this offensive. By 1917, the Russian Empire was clearly on the ropes, and the Empire's days were numbered. Tsar Nicholas's days were also numbered, as his incompetent leadership at war and in civil life, which included excluding representatives from the Duma, were apparent. The civilians were too at their wits' end, with many waiting in long lines for dwindling supplies. In the first 8 weeks of 1917, Petrograd, now St. Petersburg, saw several strikes and lockouts, and what caused the domino effect of Russia's transformation was an International Women's Day march. Finally, the revolution came. On March 8, 1917, a band of women marched in demonstration over the continuation of the war and the Tsar's government. Military in the city was ordered to suppress the protest, but the troops finally mutinied and joined the protesters. Soon, the protesters would control the railway stations, telephones and artillery supplies. Various Petrograd Soviets, or councils, united with the workers and Duma politicians to vote for a new provisional government with Prince Lvov as Prime Minister on March 14. The following day, the provisional government issued an 8-point program calling for the appointment of elected officials in government, as well as replacing the old imperial police with a people's militia. Facing such hostility from his own subjects, the Tsar finally abdicated on the same day. The world and the Russian people were elated. Almost immediately, the Allies recognized the government on March 22nd.
Excellent.
Mostly, though, to keep the Russians fighting and to keep the vast German Eastern Army in the Eastern Front. For the Russians, the oppressive Tsar was gone, and the democracy was born at last. Prince Lvov became Prime Minister, and more prominently, the War Minister Kerensky was elected. Although a democracy, the government's failings began right away, when the government proclaimed they will continue the war, despite the falling morale and the dissatisfaction of the fighting. Now, the more important question is, where the heck is Lenin? In fact, Lenin was actually in self-exile in Switzerland, along with his wife, following the 1905 revolution and the Tsar, when he began cracking down on revolutionary activity. However, when the February Revolution finally took place, he finally saw his chance to return and seize his chance on seizing power. Anyway, with the revolution, for the Germans, seeing the Russian surrender as ideal to winning the war overall, and sending more German units to be thrown at the stubborn French and the British. The Germans made a deal. After a deal to end the war, on a single train carriage with 31 comrades, Lenin would finally return to Russia. However, much to the shock of everyone, he immediately denounced the entire provisional government, calling it a capitalist government and the war incredibly imperialist with his April thesis. With this, he would translate it into his famous slogan, "Land, Bread, Peace." These three words would win the now named Bolshevik Party vast support among the population. More decisively, the army with its anti-war stance. Among this was an explosion of Bolshevik activity with many exiles, including Stalin, dun dun dun, returning from exile, and various Soviets being formed across the old Russian Empire since the February Revolution. Whilst the Bolsheviks were gaining more and more strength in Russia, for the provisional government, more and more troubles came to be. The rise of the Bolshevik Party was becoming more and more of a pain in their side. Along with a rival political entity gaining popularity, the Russian army failed its Kerensky offensive, which started on June 29, 1917. This too ended in an abysmal defeat, with the German occupation of Riga on September 5th. All Russian gains recaptured. To make things worse for the provisional government, the commander of the Kerensky offensive, General Koronov, was dismissed, and in anger and in protest, marched on Petrograd to initiate a coup. But within the suburbs of Petrograd, he was forced to surrender to the newly formed Red Army of peasants and workers. Alongside this action, and many other undermining actions, this act finally forced Lenin to begin the revolution at long last. Alright, finally. The moment everyone has finally waited for. Pushed to take action to counteract Kerensky's arrest warrant against the Bolshevik Party, Lenin was finally able to push for the Bolshevik Revolution. On the evening of November 6th and 7th, 1917, the Military Revolutionary Committee's forces took key government buildings in Petrograd, along with telegraph offices and railway stations. Roadblocks were set up on bridges and near the Winter Palace, where the provisional government was in session. These actions were never resisted, and the streets remained calm. That same night, Lenin joined his comrades and other Bolshevik leaders in the Smolny convent. On the following day, the Bolshevik forces finally surrounded the Winter Palace, whilst the provisional government waited in vain for rescue. On the early morning of November 7th, the palace fell to the Bolsheviks, followed by a single cannon shot from the Bolshevik-commanded cruiser Aurora on the river Neva. Kerensky would flee from the city, whilst the other ministers would be made prisoners. What can be said, though, is that the palace was never stormed, as many historians would usually say it was. Finally, on November 8th, the Congress of Soviets convened, packed with Soviet delegates across Russia. This enabled the Bolsheviks to neutralize the opposition to their power and transferred power to the Bolshevik Soviet of People's Commissars. And thus, the USSR was born. Oh, no, not yet. Almost immediately within a year, by 1918, the Bolsheviks were on the verge of losing control of Russia. The political ban on other parties besides the Bolsheviks caused uproar. Various anti-Bolsheviks would form a loose alliance known as the White Movement. Former Russian imperial provinces became states and desired more land at the new regime's expense. In regions across Russia, green armies would form. Other ideologies, such as anarchism in Ukraine, would take power. Thus, with all opposing ideologies and peoples finally locking arms with each other, this would start the Russian Civil War. But that will be another video for next time. Until next time, this is the HomerJT signing out.